Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Underworld. So technically right now this movie is like on in Netflix. So it was just kind of easy for me to just decide like definitely going to rewatch this. Definitely going to go into this and just kind of like remember this film for like how like the best just visual like supernatural movie that you could probably ever see. Like I know a lot of people could debate about that, but like I think overall just like the way that they present this film is just freaking amazing. Like a lot of the shots that go into this, I'm just like you could watch it via a gigantic screen or just a cell phone and you could just be like, man, this movie looks freaking amazing. Like regardless of how eventually the sequels and everything tended to break down and stuff like that. And plus also like this movie attempts to do something that I feel like no other movie has, and that is combining both a vampire and werewolf, where a lot of people have always wanted to seek out like something after this that does this, but I think a lot of times people are just like, well, like Underworld did it, and so like if we were to do it, like basically it would end up just like we'd have to figure out a unique way to do it differently than this film. Plus, I really like. I actually just would say that yeah, this is heavily an action movie where like there's so many action sequences. Like even the very beginning of the film has to butt into like or get into an action sequence right away. So like the thing that I have flack about this film is it rests a lot on action, but you know what? Like it tells a good enough story. Really, just the story is really just like, hey, like, uh, there's a human that eventually is going to turn into two different things, and so we might as well try to stop that, or we might as well just let it happen and eventually just kill off people who are against this. Really, is just what this movie breaks down to be. So like the underworld this underworld movie is to like have told us that supposedly lichens have died off for seemingly a number of years because we have of course like the movie Rise of the Lichens, but I guess supposedly the numbers of lichens had supposedly dwindled, but when really looking at this movie, like supposedly Celine's characters mentioned that there are supposedly hundreds upon hundreds of lichens, and so I guess like a number like that is just too hard to ignore. Uh, so here's the thing. I'm kind of curious for people whether like whether they like because Blade, Marvel's Blade, the Wesley Snipes films, or like I guess that would have to be like a iteration. Like, would anybody say that the Blade movies are probably better than Underworld's? I don't know, like really, like a lot of people would say maybe that there might have been like a Blade story that might have been better than any of the Underworld movies. Like they have a huge chunk of franchise with this. They kind of do a lot of things and go into a lot of different spots and places and whatever, like evolutions and blood wars and all this rigmarole. Uh, but yeah, like, but you gotta say that this movie is kind of just visually just a much more interesting approach. I like the fact that we actually have like werewolves that actually stand up instead of having to be on all fours. I always hated that in the movies where you'd have like a werewolf movie that has to forcibly be on all fours through a bulk of the film. I'm just like, man, you're just kind of really missing out on the fact that you could have like so much visual being done with this with the werewolf character. Like you can kind of see every once in a while some werewolf movies where you have a stand-up werewolf where it kind of attacks people. Uh, but yeah, like to me, like when honestly watching this film, like I remember like the werewolf movie, like Dog Soldiers, and like to me, like that movie Dog Soldiers, and watching this, like it kind of feels like whoever did that movie like took some cues from that film and tried to do this. Like I just thought that there was a lot of impressive things here that was done on the werewolf end, and a lot of people could honestly probably complain about it. Uh, to where I think the later on that we got with the werewolf kind of characters, I think the more that we actually like had them more look werewolf-ish or dog-ish in the franchise, where like one of them actually looked like a wolf. And so yeah, uh but I highly enjoy this movie just because of like just it was visual eye candy, and plus also it didn't hurt that you had some good looking characters in this movie also that was kind of selling you on this film. But yeah, so I think with that said, like I think that's all I have to say about Underworld in a very spoiler like term. Considering this movie is 2 hours, and considering how much I really want to go into huge detail about the spoiler part of this movie, like I don't know how I'm exactly going to deliver the spoiler part of this, but when looking at it, like I might just kind of like have to kind of like piddle some things out to either justify their importance or whichever. But like we'll get into a bulk of the spoiler of this movie. So with that said, I think it's about that coveted time yet again to go into spoilers. So, like, what would be my thoughts about Underworld? Like, I would probably have to say that this has to be a really great film just because it has to be the best looking supernatural movie. But, like, it kind of falls the fact of it, like, doesn't have a good written film, but it doesn't really need to be like it doesn't really need to have like when it has like the best ever looking visuals, like a story, like it has a lot of action and it has a lot of good supernatural action. It tries to do a lot of things that no other movie has done and no other movie has ever attempted. So like we have to give them credit for a lot of that. So I would say that this is a solid, great film, a solid, great film. Even more so, almost like to where we're getting to like almost like epic territory, just because like we have this like romantic story that is going between a werewolf and a vampire, and I think they try to do that again when they went into the origins of this movie, but like really just doesn't work via time period piece. But I think it works in modern time. um so yeah, with that said, let's go into that double five time territory if we haven't already, because I think it's that coveted time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of this, we like. I also just love the visuals of this movie. Like the visuals, it seems very one of a kind. Like even to where like you have like Celine is like starting this whole movie with this narration or this monologue, and I'm like, okay, like that just seems just why, like why go into a narration in the beginning of this movie? But like you know what, like every bit of it is to pay off, and plus also like the beginning narration is to help you understand this world. But like man, just the way, just the places that they pick out and the colors that the color combinations that they use for every piece of this is just so interesting. So Celine is to talk about that vampires are to be death dealers, and like lichens have very rarely seem to exist. Because evidently werewolves are called lichens in this movie because it's called, of course, lycanthropes and stuff like that. So like it's just the easier way of just calling them lichens because that's, I guess, what they should have been called all along, supposedly. But anyways, so we have Celine go into this heavy narration, and then she ends up dropping from this big, like, drop from this, like, little part of this building here to, like, the very end here. So, Celine is to make her way to this subway, and so all of a sudden we have two lichens, one who is called Rays, and another who is to just have a name that I don't know. Funny enough, the guy who plays Ray's, the guy Kevin, I'm not even gonna try to pronounce his last name. The guy Kevin, he actually wrote this movie, and so the guy that actually plays Ray's, who shouts, the movie, the first big, like besides Selena's narration, like he shouts out the word blood, and or bloods or blood. Like a lot of people never quite understood what the heck that guy was shouting in the very first beginning of this movie. Like to me, I always either thought it was war, or I thought it was like what, or I thought it was some other like combination. Let me know in the comments below what you thought Reyes was yelling at the very beginning of this movie, besides blood or bloods. Because evidently, like vampires, I guess could be called bloods. Like, what are the werewolves? The Crips? Like, that seems weird. So all of a sudden we have this interesting shootout in this subway station. All of a sudden we have Michael going into the rescue of some woman ending up getting shot in the crossfire. So he's trying to medically help her, and eventually one of the werewolves or one of the lichens is grabbing Michael. I want to continue to try to say lichens because I want to say werewolves because I'm it's just jogged in my memory like really, we have only Underworld that says lichens instead of werewolves. Everywhere else, it's werewolves, but this movie, they say lichens just to be different. So, the lichen grabs Michael and shoves him into the subway because we have these guys that are eventually trying to get Michael because they're wanting to get a sample of his blood. Um, because we have. This whole bloodline of Corvinus, which is supposed to be this ancient bloodline that is to have been able to uh, concoct the perfect uh, both vampire and werewolf that can exist in one body, and so they have to come up with like the perfect bloodline to find through Michael because of like it's not spoilers to say that eventually there's going to be like a double there's going to be what would be the combinational word of that, like is if there's a combinational word would it be like pyre like like a pyre lycan pyre. That's basically the whole word. It'd be like pyre or where pyre, wolf pyre. I don't know. I don't know what the combination or the amalgamation of whatever. So, but let's go back into the action. So we end up finding out that the lichens are to eventually shoot out uh, the death dealers or the vampires, and so we end up finding out that the lichens had come up with this special bullet that is to like create like a bullet full of sunlight or like a UV bullet. And so eventually Selena, while trying to take care of one of her other vampires, who I think is Rigel, or I think there might be another one other than that. Um, but she's to eventually find out when. Oh no, Selena is to go and try to shoot down one of these lichens, like multiple bullets inside of him. And she ends up kind of taking his cartridge and from his gun and finding out that it's like UV bullets. So uh, so what ends up happening is Michael is to eventually just escape, and Reyes is to eventually get like himself turning into a werewolf to fight. I think Rigel and or no wait, yeah, it might have been Rigel. And eventually he kills Rigel, and then goes off to eventually go back to uh, Lucian, Lucian and Singe, Singe, the doctor guy, to tell them that like they could not be able to get Michael, and so Lucian is asking Ray's like, hey, like, so do you think that they spotted that like you were following this human? And Ray's is like, I don't know, I don't think so. Because Celine will have to go through cameras and stuff like that to eventually find that this Lycan was following Michael. And it's like, okay, what is so important about this one guy? So Celine is to eventually like go and try to take down these Lycans, and eventually, while she is to like go from subway to sewer system to all kinds of things, eventually she lands herself to eventually finding, I guess, the Lycan like headquarters, or the Lycan underground uh like layer. Because eventually Selena is to eventually kind of pop her ears to just kind of hear what's going on in a certain section, because she is to start to hear the sounds of Lycans, and a number of them. So that's what leads Selena to eventually head back to her vampirish home, where it seems that Craven and a lot of the other vampires are to celebrate, because supposedly Marcus is to be awakened to in a number of days to have his reign be done, or his reign to be put together. And so I guess elders and all kinds of like big head honcho vampires are trying to make their way there to welcome Marcus to, I guess, the like his throne, basically. Actually, a lot of the people, like the elders that you eventually see coming on that train, we'll actually see in the prequel Underworld movie, because unfortunately the elders like that are on that train spot, all of them die. But coincidentally, I guess they have a much bigger spot in the Rise of the Lycans prequel, which is interesting. So, but anyways, so let's back up. So Michael is to escape from being from being a werewolf or a vampire, and so he ends up just kind of being on his own. So Selena is just kind of realizing that these werewolves are going after Michael, and so she decides, you know what, like I think a lot of our death dealers should be going out right now and like solving this problem. And Craven is just like, what are you talking about? It's like, if anything, we should all like go and party and celebrate, because Marcus is gonna be like reigning pretty soon. And so like, but like Selena is just like, you know what, I think probably Victor would probably have a completely different answer than what you would. And we eventually have it where Selena eventually goes over Craven's head, and eventually goes on to eventually going and summoning Victor, which supposedly like Selena didn't have the real skill uh to awaken Victor. Like supposedly like that's why supposedly elders and stuff like that normally would awaken Victor, but like Selena just desperately needed his guidance and desperately needed his like command to eventually just like try to solve this whole problem, or to otherwise just say like, oh, okay, Selena is telling me the truth, so now I'm going to have to like resolve this problem. So Victor is slowly but surely getting awakened, and so eventually, because kind of Craven is kind of keeping everything under wraps, or trying to keep everything under wraps, because really he wants to be able to put this whole like truce between the werewolves or the lichens like together. And so Craven is just trying to like any activity that the lichens are doing, he's trying to like put uh, a shush to that, just so that way like no one's the wiser. So anyways, so what eventually ends up happening is Michael is to go to his home, and eventually the lichens and Lucian are to try to make their way to Michael, because they of course want to get a blood sample from him. But they also just basically just want to turn him, because they're like, you know what, like he'll probably be much more protected if he is a either lichen or a vampire, much more so than being a normal human. Because if the vampires are to try to quickly figure out like what's going on, they would probably have him killed. So going on into this movie, we eventually have Celine go out and try to figure out what the heck is going on with this Michael guy. Why is he so important? So all of a sudden we have Selena, who ends up going and finding Michael, and having him go down the elevator and like try to protect him. And so we have this interesting spot where like Selena is fighting the lichens, and all of a sudden we have her like shooting all around her to eventually drop a floor. And like so um because I guess there's too many lichens that are kind of like getting her outnumbered, and so like she has to just like shoot bullets all around her to fall a floor. Um, but yeah, so what eventually happens is Lucian ends up going and biting Michael, and then also getting a blood sample from him, and so we but we do have Selena, who ends up taking Michael and shooting Lucian. And this is just a spot where we don't have like. I'm gonna have to pause here for a second. All right. So, uh, so we have Selena grabbing Michael, and eventually they drive off. And so what ends up happening is Lucian ends up like tracking them down and putting a blade through the car, and then all of a sudden we have Selena, who ends up getting stabbed. So what eventually ends up happening is both Michael and Selena still do get away from Lucian, and but eventually what ends up happening is Selena is to lose way too much blood, and then all of a sudden she's to lose control of the car. All of a sudden the car flips and is to land into this water, where all of a sudden like both Michael and Selena are drowning. So what ends up happening is Michael ends up shooting the window, and they get out of the car. And Michael could have probably just left freaking Selena and just be like, I am freaking out of here. But instead, he ends up going and like, uh, like taking care of her, and then eventually he is to uh, just kind of just leave, because it's like, well, yeah, I took care of you, so I'm gonna get the heck out of here. So, uh, eventually, what ends up happening is, oh no, wait. I think what ends up happening is uh, Michael ends up has like a severe bump on the head, like he probably got knocked unconscious. So eventually Selena takes Michael to the vampire house. That's what happens. I'm like, what happens? So uh, we have Erica, who is to go and like talk to Selena about like, yeah, everybody's buzzing about this new pet that you have. Like, are you gonna turn him? And Selena's like, But so Erica is to eventually go and look at Michael and spot that he has a werewolf or lichen bite, and so Erica is to bizarrely like a weird cat moment. Like Erica is to go and jump onto the wall and just be like, ah! And so Michael ends up basically running like a crazy man. Like he ends up jumping from the window onto the ground and like scaling this fence and getting the heck out of there just because he's like, what the heck is this place? He ends up going. He ends up going to one of his friends, who's Doctor Adam, and kind of seeking medical attention for this bite that he had gotten. Uh, Eventually, we have Doctor Adam, who eventually is to have two police officers heading to his hospital to mention about Michael that they want to eventually like if he's here like kind of keep him here so the Lycans who are disguised as cops can go and collect Michael. So uh so what eventually happens is we at some point have Craven making his way to Lucian, and Craven is kind of upset with Lucian because he should have been keeping his activities a lot more quiet, and Lucian is just kind of mentioning that, hey, like you'll get everything that you dreamed of like in the meantime, but like right now we're just needing to like get like the get what we want as well. So blah blah blah. It's a bunch of garbity gook. So uh let's get back into Michael being at the hospital. So eventually Dr. Adams is to basically call the two Lycan detectives, and so they end up scooping up Michael, and what ends up happening is Michael is starting to change via the car, and so they decide that they wanted to drug him, take a needle to him, to just kind of like stop him from transforming into a lichen. So eventually the cops have to pull over because he's not going to last very long, and so they go and drug him, and so now like Michael is kind of just not going to change. So what ends up happening is the Lycans go and take Michael to their spot, their headquarters. So uh, really, the breakdown of this. So Selena is to tell Victor, and Victor is to kind of not believe Selena at first, and eventually we end up finding out somewhere in this movie that supposedly Selena was to have had all of her family be killed off, supposedly by Lycans. But the actual truth of the matter is that eventually we'll find later, like really later on in the movie, that supposedly Victor himself, as well as a number of other vampires, had gone on to kill Selena's family, but left Selena alive because evidently Selena reminded Victor very much of his daughter, and the daughter that he had to forcibly kill because Lucian uh, was to have been seduced by her and vice versa. And like Victor's daughter was to eventually be pregnant with child that was supposed to have abomination of a child uh, that Victor couldn't bear having birthed. Um, but yeah, uh, so Michael is to consistently see the flashbacks of that, and eventually, like you're gonna be able to see a lot more scenes of that and more. With the movie Rise of Lycans, you can kind of basically watch like the actual scene, uh, like of how that all played out in Rise of Lycans, and kind of see Lucian's character, who eventually ends up having to forcibly die in this movie, which I never could quite understand. I'm like, okay, like this is basically like the head guy of the werewolves, and now he's dead. But in like Rise of Lycans, he's such like a really like he's such a real force in Rise of Lycans that you can't imagine like him like eventually just dying in the first Underworld movie. Uh, but eventually, what ends up happening is Khan, who is kind of the weapons tech guy, ends up realizing that they can kind of eventually go and make a werewolf bullet that is to really go into like silver nitrate and be able to have a much more effective werewolf bullet than they've ever had in the past. Where if one person is to get infected by this bullet, like they're going to die. Like the whole silver is going to go through this person's entire body and kill them off. So all the more reason to eventually probably protect Michael from eventually death. So Michael is to head into the werewolf den, and so like they're taking blood from him and they're testing it, and of course like his blood is going to work. And so eventually we have Lucian who tries to take blood from Michael and puts it into himself. And so what eventually ends up happening is Victor is to reasonably just find out that what Selena is saying is true, and so he's deciding like, okay, well, we're gonna need to kill Michael, of course, and like we're going to need to take down this Lycan threat, and so that pushes Selena to eventually just go like where her father is going, but like also like she has a different agenda. So and so we push on to have all the vampires starting to take down a lot of the werewolves. A lot of the werewolves are starting to change, and so we have these like cool battle sequences between vampires that are just kind of shooting out these lichens, and lichens getting a pretty decent bite out of a lot of these vampires. So, um, because I kind of skipped the part about the whole elders, I guess we can go back into that. Like before the whole battle, we have these elders, these vampire elders that are all arriving on this train. And so all the lichens go and attack all these elders and go rip their throats out and murder and kill all of them. To where eventually there is to be word from one of the vampires mentioning that all the elders are all dead. And Victor asks for Amelia, and and like, yeah, she's dead too. And he's like, oh well, like since there are really and truly legitimate lichens, like that's what leads Victor to want to go and exterminate all of them and kill them all off. Um, because there is real evidence that there's lichens around, because he just couldn't believe and take Selena's word. So now we have like action sequences. We get where they bizarrely take uh, the bullet that they had kind of manufactured. They also turned it also into a grenade. So they have like a silver nitrate grenade that they end up going and tossing down this one ladder spot. And so that ends up getting a bunch of the werewolves and killing them all off. So eventually both Craven and Lucian are are talking about what they want out of this, like how uh, like Lucian is to say that he is going to be able to reign supreme as far as the vampires goes, and but still have an airtight treaty with the werewolves or the lichens. And so while Lucian is to eventually have his back turned to Craven, Craven ends up shooting Lucian in the back, to the point of him eventually succumbing to the uh, silver nitrate bullet. but it seems like he's taking forever to die. Like, I guess he just wants to have these like last bits of dialogue and so on and so forth, but like, so I guess they probably really didn't want to kill this character off, but I guess they just made that mistake. So uh but eventually what happens also is like Craven also ends up getting like stabbed in the leg. uh I'm gonna have to pause here for a second. All right, so we're kind of heading towards the end of the movie. Like, I try to skip a lot just because of like reasonably um like, oh, I forgot about the whole like interrogation room spot where because eventually Michael comes back to the vampire house and eventually is like, hey, what's wrong with me? And Selena is to eventually like drive a car out to Michael and just kind of tell him it's like, hey, you're going to change into a werewolf. And so like Selena takes Michael into this room where they used to interrogate people. And so uh Selena is to chain Michael up for good reason because eventually he's going to turn soon. And so Selena, or Celine, I've been calling her Selena this whole time. It's Celine. I apologize. I know a lot of people are going to be like, it's Celine. I didn't realize it. Like, the name sounds the same. But Celine ends up going and chaining down Michael and saying like, okay, like, here's one round, here's one bullet of like a silver bullet. If anything, like, if you start to change, like, justifiably just put a bullet in your head and like call it a day. But Michael decides that he's gonna try to shoot the chains off, and that doesn't quite work. Celine ends up going and unchaining Michael and like trying to get the heck out of there because eventually like the lichens are coming for him and coming for Michael, and plus also the vampires are going to try to kill him off, so might as well just run off to eventually be grabbed by the lichens and eventually taken to their den. So yeah, so I just wanted to quickly cover that just in case I forgot about that moment. A lot of people are like, hey, what about the interrogation room thing? uh so Victor, I think, ends up killing Reyes. I can't be like confirming that because like once the worlds change, they all kind of look the same. So I guess you'd have to just confirm that Victor took out Reyes. I don't know. A lot of the like, there's not a huge differential of color of lichen, so it could have been any lichen, could have been anyone. Um, but yeah, so what ends up happening is Craven comes into the fold, and because Celine is to like on because Michael is strapped to a table, Celine comes in and on straps Michael, and they try to walk out of there, and it obviously seems that both Celine and Michael are to be in a relationship because Michael eventually kisses Celine. So Craven ends up going and shooting Michael because it's the right thing to do, and he's a Lycan, and so eventually I believe Craven is to eventually just escape all this. I believe. Um, I can't confirm. I think he either gets killed or because I know he like goes down this ladder and falls like a pretty massive way. But I don't know whether or not he actually dies or not in this film. I think he ends up just running off. Uh, but eventually Lucian is to tell Celine to bite him, and because Celine was to bring in the doctor to Victor and mention about the Corvinus bloodline and how they were trying to perfect the hybrid of both werewolf and vampire, and Victor was mentioning how there is Marcus who has the Corvinus bloodline. It's like, well, yeah, but that was from like vampire, like that wasn't from um, like Corvinus himself that could go and be either or. So, and evidently the human side of Corvinus, like they had the bloodline. So, with that said, so we have Victor who starts taking down Lycans, and then eventually goes and finds Michael and grabs him by the neck and just kind of chucks him through this wall, to fallen into this water. And so all of a sudden we have Michael who is in this water, who is at first changing into being a lichen. And so they're like, oh, okay, so like, is this going to be the end for, like, is he not going to survive the change? What's going to go on here? I'm kind of interested to see what eventually this thing will look like, because I hope it's going to be pretty cool. And like, I think they do it like good enough. Like, I don't know, I was kind of like about the whole like hybrid thing, like, and plus also I don't think we got enough of the hybrid also, especially in this series. Like, I was just kind of disappointed that we didn't truly get like enough of the lichen thing. I was just kind of just like, man, this sucks. Like, we seriously couldn't have gotten like a like hybrid or then hybrids. Like, that would have been really cool, but like that just never happened. Or at least like I think they should have just eventually went with the hybrid character being the main character, um, and eventually maybe like just had a whole movie about that, like, and then con back into the whole like Celine thing and like continued on that story. That would have just been a nice change of pace, and then eventually they could have done what they could have done with Michael. Um, but that's just my thoughts about it. So, uh, so eventually Michael is changing, and then so all of a sudden, we eventually have it where like Victor is asking Celine where Craven is, and so eventually it's basically like Celine is to kind of be upset with Victor because Celine knows the truth, because Craven had told her about the whole like that actually like Victor had killed her parents and her family and her whatever. So uh and Victor was to just like justify it, but it by it's like, well, but you're my daughter, like you're like I just like I he needed her. Like, I think he needed her, or like Celine just looks so much like his daughter that it's just like, well, like she'll just become my daughter. I'll manipulate her. I'll whatever I have to, and so yeah, because Craven, I guess, was supposed to forcibly be with Celine, but Celine wanted nothing to do with Craven. Uh, Celine just kept pushing Craven on Erica, and because Erica was like dying in one word or the other to want to be with Craven. So, uh, so what eventually ends up happening is Victor goes and is to just battle it out uh, with Hybrid. Like, I don't know what to call him. Like, besides Michael, like, uh, like because there's not an actual like, I guess they should have looked it up to see like if there was like a duo thing to call him. Um, but yeah, so Victor fights Michael, and like I love this like combat between like Victor and Michael. Like these spots were just really cool. Just kind of see this like back and forth of a thing, where they're like tearing into one another, and there's a lot of tossing and stuff involved. It's really interesting, and so but eventually this fight mainly ends with like Victor almost getting like the drop on Michael, but eventually Celine comes in and kind of like does this big huge uh like kind of like a flip of a move, and all of a sudden like Victor is to like put out his swords, but all of a sudden he doesn't even realize that he's already been cut. Like half of his head just like slides off, and that he's basically dead. He doesn't even realize he's dead until like his head slides off. And so it's like, okay, like I guess Celine has chosen her side, and it's the side of being with Michael. So like man do I like this Lycan like appearance, but again there's also some kind of like back and forth that I have about it. Like I wish there was more, like I wish there was something like more to the design. Like it feels too simple, uh but whatever. So eventually Michael changes back into normal Michael, and so like we just have this movie just kind of like wrap up. Eventually this is going to lead to have Celine and Michael just like kind of doing adventures together, and eventually having a possible kid with one another. And so eventually that'll happen later on movies. But so yeah, really that's just kind of how this movie eventually just kind of trickles out. This movie ends with us basically just seeing Singe, who was kind of bleeding out, into Marcus's like little little like being held spot, where we just see Marcus's eyes open, and that eventually he is going to be a part of the next Underworld film. So with that said, I think I covered like decent amount of this movie, but also there's like little spots here and there where like not perfect transitions, or like there's spots where I just basically was like, I don't think I need to cover like spots. Uh like there was two werewolves fighting in one spot, and Lucian was kind of calling them animals and stuff like that. And uh yeah, I don't think I needed to cover that spot. I think I covered it just the movie. But either way, at the end of the day, you could also say like, hey, you didn't cover this spot or whatever. Like there's one part where Selena was to eventually research Lucian's necklace and eventually find a ripped off part of skin uh, that I think was Lucian's, to kind of prove that Lucian supposedly was dead. Uh, but then eventually Celine is to confront Craven about this, and like say how like man, I guess you really didn't get like the true evidence of all this, because like they left his skin in some part of a book, and so like Celine kind of matched the skin with the picture. But yeah, so like, and it all came down to like Lucian's necklace, and that eventually like Celine took Lucius's necklace and I think gave it to Michael. So yeah, so I think that's all that I wanted to say about this movie. I hope, because I always like kind of have this like thought process of like, oh my god, I think I completely forgot a big chunk of this film, or like I forgot like some like big piece or whatever. But like looking at it, like I think I did good enough, I guess, for whatever. Anyways, so yeah, like visually an epic film, but like really it's just like we'll eventually see how these Underworld movies eventually trickle out, because from what I can remember, um because yeah, they went into like several of these movies, and like I've seen all of them. I think I went into every single one of them, and I was just like, man, like these stories just just really fall apart, or it just seems like they had like it starts to get where it just feels like there's like one goal of the story, or they kind of focus on one thing way too often in a lot of these sequels, and it just gets annoying. Um, Plus, it eventually just becomes that eventually Selena has to become more and more powerful as these sequels eventually go into the fray. Like she eventually has to become this like one of a kind like thing to try to be an even match for certain characters because obviously uh, something happens to another character in the other sequels to eventually have to force Selena to be a much more powerful vampire, let's just say. So, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.